Afternoon, friends. Welcome to another episode of Kahuna Reads, where I read your stuff and other stuff. I know that's really specific. Okay. So, I'm actually going to be right back because I got to get my water. Be right back. Failing myself of my drink, realized I have not eaten yet today. Not a good thing. So, I got peanut butter cookie. So, as always, you have something you would like me to read? Drop it. My Discord channel. Drop it in the showcase request channel. I'll be more than happy to read what you have. Go from there. Right now I don't have anything, so we're going to continue with Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. When last we checked in with Victor, was woeing his there we go. He was woeing his misfortune, so to speak, for having created the creature, and that the creature has apparently killed his youngest brother, and someone other than the creature has been held responsible, someone he knows is innocent and who says they are innocent and he has every reason to believe is innocent. They have been sentenced to death and have now been executed for the murder of the young child. And so he is full of remorse for what he has done. So that's where we left it at the end of chapter 8. I'm going to have myself a bit of cookie, drink a little water, and we'll start with chapter 9. Good peanut butter cookie. Okay. I'll clean up here on my desk. And up on aisle 5. All right. Let us continue with chapter 9. Of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Nothing is more painful to the human mind than after the feelings have been worked up by a quick succession of events, the dead calmness of inaction and certainty which follows and deprives the soul both of hope and fear. Justine died. She rested, and I was alive. The blood flowed freely in my veins, but a weight of despair and remorse pressed on my heart, which nothing could remove. Sleep fled from my eyes. I wandered like an evil spirit, for I had committed deeds of mischief beyond description, horrible, and more Much more, I persuaded myself, was yet behind. Yet my heart overflowed with kindness and the love of virtue. I had begun life with benevolent intentions and thirsted for the moment when I should put them in practice and make myself useful to my fellow beings. Now all was blasted. Instead of that serenity of conscience which allowed me to look back upon the past with self-satisfaction, and from thence to gather promise of new hopes, I was seized by remorse and the sense of guilt, which hurried me away to a hell of intense tortures such as no language can describe. This state of mind preyed upon my health, which had perhaps never entirely recovered from the first shock it had sustained. It shuns the face of man. All sound of joy or complacency was torture to me. Solitude was my only consolation. Deep, dark, death-like solitude. My father observed with pain the alteration perceptible in my disposition and habits, and endeavored by arguments deduced from the feelings of his serene conscience and guiltless life to inspire me with fortitude and awaken in me the courage to dispel the dark cloud which brooded over me. "Do you think, Victor," said he, "that I do not suffer also? No one could love a child more than I loved your brother." Tears came into his eyes as he spoke. "But is it not a duty to the survivors that we should refrain from augmenting their unhappiness by an appearance of immoderate grief? It is also a duty owed to yourself. For excessive sorrow, hence improvement or enjoyment, or even the discharge of daily usefulness, without which no man is fit for society." This advice, although good, was totally inapplicable to my case. I should not have been the first to hide my grief and console my friends if remorse had not mingled its bitterness and terror its alarm with my other sensations. Now I could only answer my father with a look of despair and endeavor to hide myself from his view. About this time, we retired to our house at Bellerive. This change was particularly agreeable to me. The shutting of the gates regularly at 10 o'clock and the impossibility of remaining on the lake after that hour had rendered our residence within the walls of Geneva very irksome to me. I was now free. Often, after the rest of the family had retired for the night, I took the boat and passed many hours upon the water. Sometimes, with my sails set, I was carried by the wind. And sometimes, after rowing into the middle of the lake, I left the boat to pursue its own course and gave way to my own miserable reflection. I was often tempted, when all was at peace around me, and the only unquiet thing that wandered restless in a scene so beautiful and heavenly, if I except some bat or the frogs whose harsh and interrupted croaking was heard only when I approached the shore. Often, I say, I was tempted to plunge into the silent lake. The waters might close over me, my calamities forever. I was restrained. When I thought of the heroic and suffering Elizabeth, whom I tenderly loved, and whose existence was bound up in mine, I thought also of my father, surviving brother. Should I, by my base desertion, leave them exposed and unprotected to the malice of the fiend whom I had let loose among them? These moments I wept bitterly and wished that peace would revisit my mind, only that I might afford them consolation and happiness. But that could not be. Remorse extinguished every hope. I had been the author of unalterable evils. I lived in daily fear lest the monster whom I had created should perpetrate some new wickedness. I had an obscure feeling that all was not over, that he would still commit some signal crime, by which its enormity should almost efface the recollection of the past. There was always scope for fear, so long as anything I loved remained behind. My abhorrence of this fiend could not be conceived. When I thought of him, I gnashed my teeth, my eyes became inflamed, and I ardently wished to extinguish that life which I had so thoughtlessly bestowed. When I reflected on his crimes and malice, my hatred and revenge missed all bounds of moderation. I would have made a pilgrimage to the highest peak of the Andes, could I, when there have precipitated him to the base. I wish to see him again, that I might wreak the utmost extent of abhorrence on his head and avenge the deaths of William and Justine. Our house was a house of mourning. My father's health was deeply shaken by the horror of the recent events. Elizabeth, sad and desponding, she no longer took delight in her ordinary occupations. All pleasure seemed to her sacrilege towards the dead. Eternal woe and tears, she then thought, was just the tribute she should pay to innocence so blasted and destroyed. She was no longer that happy creature who in earlier youth wandered with me on the banks of the lake and talked with ecstasy of our future prospects. The first of those sorrows, which had sent a Venus from the earth, had visited her, and its dimming influence quenched dearest smiles. "When I reflect, my dear cousin," said she, "on the miserable death of Justine Moritz, I no longer see the world and its works as they before appeared to me. Before, I looked upon the accounts of vice and injustice that I read in books or heard from others as tales of ancient days or imaginary evils. At least they were remote and more familiar to reason than to the imagination. But now misery has come home, and men appear to me as monsters, thirsting for each other's blood. I am certainly unjust. Everybody believed that poor girl to be guilty, and if she could have committed the crime for which she suffered, assuredly she would have been the most depraved of human creatures. But for the sake of a few jewels to have murdered the son of her benefactor and friend, a child whom she had nursed from its birth and appeared to love as if it had been her own. I could not consent to the death of any human being, but certainly I should have thought such a creature unfit to remain in the society of men. She was innocent. I feel she was innocent. You are of the same opinion, and that confirms me. Alas, Victor, when falsehood can look so like the truth, who can assure themselves of certain happiness? I feel as if I were walking on the edge of a precipice towards which thousands are crowding and endeavoring to plunge me into the abyss. William and Justine were assassinated, and the murderer escapes. He walks about the world free and perhaps respected. And even if I were condemned to suffer on the scaffold for the same crimes, I would not change places with such a wretch." I listened to this discourse with the extremest agony. I not indeed, in effect, was the true murderer. Elizabeth read my anguish in my countenance, and kindly taking my hand said, "My dearest friend, you must calm yourself. These events have affected me. God knows how deeply. But I am not so wretched as you are. There is an expression of despair and sometimes of revenge in your countenance that makes me tremble. Dear Victor, banish these dark passions. Remember the friends around you, who center all their hopes in you. Have we lost the power of rendering you happy? Ah, while we love, while we are true to each other here, in this land of peace and beauty, your native country, we may reap every tranquil blessing and disturb our peace." And could not such words from her whom I fondly prized before every other gift of fortune suffice chase away the fiends that lurked in my heart? Even as she spoke, I drew nearer to her, as if in terror, lest at that very moment the destroyer had been near to rob me of her. Thus, the tenderness of friendship, or the beauty of earth, nor of heaven could redeem my soul from woe. The very accents of love were ineffectual. I was encompassed by a cloud which no beneficial influence could penetrate. The wounded deer dragging its fainting limbs to some untrodden brake, there to gaze upon the arrow which had pierced it, and to die, was but a type of me. Sometimes I could cope with the sullen despair that overwhelmed me. Sometimes the whirlwind passions of my soul drove me to seek, by bodily exercise and by change of place, some relief from my intolerable sensations. It was during an access of this kind that I suddenly left my home, and bending my steps towards the near alpine valleys, sought in the magnificence, the eternity of such scenes. Forget myself and my ephemeral, because human sorrows. My wanderings were directed towards the valley of Chamonix. I had visited frequently during my childhood. 6 years had passed since then. I was a wreck, but naught had changed in those savage and enduring sea. I performed the first part of my journey on horseback. I afterwards hired a mule, as the more sure-footed and least liable to receive injury on these rugged roads. The weather was fine. It was about the middle of the month of August, nearly 2 months after the death of Justine, that miserable epoch from which I dated all my woe. The weight upon my spirit was sensibly lightened as I plunged yet deeper in the ravine of Arbe. The immense mountains and precipices that overhung me on every side, the sounds of the river raging among the rocks, the dashing of the waterfalls, around spoke of a power mighty as omnipotence. I ceased to fear, or to bend before any being less almighty than that which had created and ruled the elements, here displayed in their most terrific guise. Still, as I ascended higher, the valley assumed a more magnificent and astonishing character. Ruined castles hanging on the precipices of piny mountains, the impetuous Arve, and cottages, every here and there peeping forth from among the trees, formed a scene of singular beauty. But it was augmented and rendered sublime as the mighty Alps, whose white and shining pyramids and domes towered above all, as belonging to another earth, the habitations of another race of beings. I passed the bridge of Pelissier, as a ravine which the river forms opened before me, and as I began to ascend the mountains that overhangs it, soon after I entered the valley of Chamonix. This valley is more wonderful and sublime, not so beautiful and picturesque as that of Servoz, which I had just passed. The high and snowy mountains were its immediate boundaries, but I saw no more ruined castles and fertile fields. Immense glaciers approached the road. I heard the rumbling thunder of the falling avalanche and marked the smoke of its passage. Mont Blanc, supreme and magnificent Mont Blanc, raised itself from the surrounding Aiguille, and its tremendous dome overlooks the valley. A tingling, long-lost sense of pleasure came across me during this journey. Some turn in the road, some new object, suddenly perceived and recognized, reminded me of days gone by, and were associated with the light-hearted gaiety of boyhood. The very winds whispered in soothing accents. Maternal nature bade me weep no more. Then again, the kindly influence ceased to act. I myself fettered again to grief, and indulging in all the misery of reflection. Then I spurred on my animal, striving so to forget the world, my fears, and more than all myself. Or in a more desperate fashion, I alighted and threw myself on the grass, weighed down by horror and despair. At length I arrived at the village of Chamonix. Exhaustion succeeded to the extreme fatigue of both body and of mind which I had endured for such a short space of time. I remained at the window watching the pallid lightnings fade above Mont Blanc and listening to the rushing of the Arve, which pursued its noisy way beneath. The same lulling sounds acted as a lullaby by two keen sensations. And when I placed my head upon my pillow, sleep crept over me. I felt as it came and blessed the giver of oblivion. Welcome! Welcome those who have joined. Kit, hello! Siobhan, hello! Hey, Stretch! Welcome, everyone. And for another bite of peanut butter cookie. I hope everyone's doing well. If you have something you want me to read, as always, drop it in the showcase requests channel. I don't have anything from anybody right now, so I'm still reading Frankenstein. Well, Kit, thanks for stopping by at least. Go have dinner. Enjoy dinner. And take your kids to their activities. I know. And I've read a bunch of your stuff, and I love to read it. So maybe if you ever think about it, just drop it in there during the week at some point. And I'll read it on the Friday, and we'll go from there. I do still owe a couple people videos. I haven't gotten to editing. I've been doing a bunch of other stuff. I got the date for my shoulder surgery, which is see you, Kid. I got the date for my shoulder surgery, which is the 3rd, coming out on the 3rd of April. So my gaming streams will probably change dramatically because I won't be able to do things with my right arm, which is what I use for the mouse and what I use for joysticks for my flight sim and stuff like that. So I'll be changing up gaming stream a little bit. The work stream should be okay. Reads should not change at all. I'm just going to need to learn to mouse either right up against my body, which I have a trackball for, or left-handed. Either one shouldn't be too bad. So, Siobhan, are you enjoying having Clockrocket there? I'm betting the answer is yes. Ugh. Now, where are we? You know what I didn't do is I didn't put up my stream manager, so I don't know when ads are. All right, so next ad's in 27 minutes. So, until I get something from someone for the reads, I will continue on Frankenstein with chapter 10. I spent the following day roaming through the valley. I stood beside the sources of the Aveyron, which take their rise in a glacier, that with slow pace is advancing down from the summit of the hills to barricade the valley. The abrupt sides of vast mountains were before me. The icy wall of the glacier overhung me. Few shattered pines were scattered around, and the solemn silence of this glorious presence chamber of imperial nature was broken only by the brawling waves or the fall of some vast fragment, the thunder sound of the avalanche, or the cracking, reverberated along the mountains of the accumulated ice, which, through the silent working of immutable laws, was ever and anon rent and torn, as if it had been but a plaything in their hands. These sublime and magnificent scenes afforded me the greatest consolation that I was capable of receiving. They elevated me from all littleness of feeling, and although they did not remove my grief, they subdued and tranquilized it. In some degree, they diverted my mind from the thoughts over which it had brooded for the last month. I retired to rest at night, my slumbers as it were, waited on and ministered to by the semblance of grand shapes which I had contemplated during the day. They congregated round me, the unstained snowy mountaintop, the glittering pinnacles, the pine woods, and ragged bare ravine, the eagle soaring amidst the clouds. They all gathered round me and bade me at peace. As they had fled, and the next morning I awoke, all of soul and spiriting fled with sleep, and dark melancholy clouded every thought. The rain was pouring in torrents, and the thick mists hid the summits of the mountains, so that I even saw not the faces of those mighty friends. Still, it would penetrate their misty veil and seek them in their cloudy retreats. What was rain and storm to me? My mule was brought to the door, and I resolved to ascend to the summit of Mont Anvers. I remembered the effect that the view of the tremendous and ever-moving glacier had produced upon my mind when I first saw it. It had then filled me with a sublime ecstasy that gave wings to the soul and allowed it to soar from the obscure world to the light and joy. The sight of the awful and majestic in nature had indeed always the effect of solemnizing my mind and causing me to forget the passing cares of life. I determined to go without a guide, for I was well acquainted with the path. The presence of another would destroy the solitary grandeur of the scene. The ascent is precipitous, but the path is cut into continual and short windings, which enable you to surmount the perpendicularity of the mountain. It is a scene terrifically desolate. In 1,000 spots, the traces of the winter avalanche may be perceived. Where trees lie broken and strewed on the ground, some entirely destroyed, others bent, leaning upon the jutting rocks of the mountain or transversely upon other trees. The path, as you ascend higher, is intersected by ravines of snow, down which stones continually roll from above. One of them is particularly dangerous as the slightest sound, such as even speaking in a loud voice, produces a concussion of air sufficient to draw destruction upon the head of the speaker. The pines are not all tall or luxuriant, somber, and add an air of severity to the scene. I looked on the valley beneath. Vast mists were rising from the rivers which ran through it, and curling in thick wreaths on the opposite mountains, whose summits were hid in the uniform clouds. while rain poured from the dark sky and added to the melancholy impression I received from the objects around me. Alas, why does man boast of sensibilities superior to those apparent in the brute? It only renders them more necessary beings. Our impulses were confined to hunger, thirst, and desire. We might nearly be free. Now we are moved by every wind that blows and the chance word or scene that the word may convey to us. We rest. A dream has power to poison sleep. We rise. One wandering thought pollutes the day. We feel, conceive, or reason, laugh, or weep. Face on woe, or cast our cares away. It is the same, for be it joy or sorrow, the path of its departure still is free. And yesterday may ne'er be like his morrow. Naught may endure mutability. It was nearly noon when I arrived at the top of the ascent. For some time I sat upon the rock that overlooks the sea of ice. A mist covered both that and the surrounding mountains. Presently a breeze dissipated the cloud, and I descended upon the glacier. The surface is very uneven, rising like the waves of a troubled sea, descending low and interspersed by rifts that sink deep. The field of ice is almost a league in width. I spent nearly 2 hours in crossing it. The opposite mountain is a bare, perpendicular rock. The side where I now stood, Montanvert, was exactly opposite at the distance of a league, and above it rose Mont Blanc, in awful majesty. I remained in a recess of the rock, gazing on this wonderful and stupendous scene. The sea, or rather the vast river of ice, wound upon its dependent mountains whose aerial summits hung over its recesses. The icy and glittery peaks shone in the sunlight over the clouds. My heart, which was before sorrowful, now swelled with something like joy. I exclaimed, "Wandering spirits, if indeed ye wander, and do not rest in your narrow beds, allow me this faint happiness, or take me as your companion away from the joys of life." As I said this, I suddenly beheld the figure of a man at some distance, advancing towards me with superhuman speed. He bounded over the crevices in the ice, among which I had walked with caution. His stature also, as he approached, seemed to exceed that of a man. I was troubled. A mist came over my eyes, and I felt a faintness seize me, but I was quickly restored by the cold gale of the mountains. I perceived as his shape came nearer, slight, tremulous, and abhorred that it was the wretch whom I created. I trembled with rage and horror, resolving to wait his approach and then close with him in mortal combat. He approached. His countenance bespoke bitter anguish, combined with disdain and malignity, while his unearthly ugliness rendered it almost too horrible for human eyes. Scarcely observes this. Rage and hatred had at first deprived me of utterance, and I recovered only to overwhelm him with words expressive of furious detestation and contempt. "Devil!" I exclaimed. "Do you dare approach me? And do you not fear the fierce vengeance of my arm wreaked on your miserable head? Begone, vile insect! Or rather, nay, that I may trample you to dust. And oh, that I could, with the extension of your miserable existence, restore those victims whom you have so diabolically murdered." "I expected this reception," said the demon. "All men hate the wretched. How then must I be hated, who am miserable beyond all living things? Yet you, my creator, detest and spurn me, thy creature, to whom thou art bound by ties only dissoluble by the annihilation of one of us. You purpose to kill me. How dare you sport thus with life? Do your duty towards me, and I will do mine towards you and the rest of mankind. If you will comply with my conditions, I will leave them and you at peace. But if you refuse, I will glut the maw of death until it be satiated with the blood of your remaining friends. Abhorred monster fiends that thou art! The tortures of hell are too mild a vengeance for thy crimes, wretched devil! You'll reproach me with your creation? Come on, then, that I may extinguish the spark which I so negligently bestowed. My rage was without bounds. I sprang on him, impelled by all the feelings which can arm one, being against the existence of another. He easily eluded me and said, "Be calm. I entreat you to hear me before you give vent your hatred on my devoted head. Have I not suffered enough that you seek to increase my misery? Life, although it may only be an accumulation of anguish, is dear to me, and I will defend it. Remember, thou hast made me more powerful than thyself. My height is superior to thine, my joints more supple. But I will not be tempted to set myself in opposition to thee. I am thy creature. I will be even mild and docile to my natural lord and king if thou wilt also perform thy part, the which thou owest me. Frankenstein, be not equitable to every other and trample upon me alone, to whom thy justice and even thy clemency and affection is most due. Remember that I am thy creature. I ought to be thy Adam. I am rather the fallen angel whom thou drivest from joy in no misdeed. Everywhere I see bliss, from which I alone am irrevocably excluded. I was benevolent and good. Misery made me a fiend. Make me happy, and I shall again be virtuous. Begone! I will not hear you. There can be no community between you and me. We are enemies. Begone, or let us try our strength in a fight in which one must fall. How can I move thee? Will no entreaties cause thee to turn a favorable eye upon thy creature, who implores thy goodness and compassion? Believe me, Frankenstein, I was benevolent. My soul glowed with love and humanity. And not alone, miserably alone. You, my creator, abhor me. What hope can I gather from your fellow creatures who owe me nothing? They spurn and hate me. The desert mountains and dreary glaciers are my refuge. I have wandered here many days, the caves of ice, which I only do not fear, are a dwelling to me, and the only one which man does not grudge. These bleak skies I hail. They are kinder to me than your fellow beings. If the multitude of mankind knew of my existence, they would do as you do and arm themselves for my destruction. Shall I not hate them who abhor me? I will keep no terms with my enemies. I am miserable, and they shall share my wretchedness. Yet it is in your power to recompense me and deliver them from an evil which it only remains for you to make so great that not only you and your family, but thousands of others shall be swallowed up in the whirlwinds of its rage. Let your compassion be moved and do not disdain me. Listen to my tale. When you have heard that, abandon or commiserate me. as you shall judge that I deserve. But hear me. The guilty are allowed by human laws, bloody as they are, to speak in their own defense before they are condemned. Listen to me, Frankenstein. You accuse me of murder, and yet you would, with a satisfied conscience, destroy your own creature. Oh, praise the eternal justice of man. Yet I ask you not to spare me. Listen to me, and then if you can, and if you will, destroy the work of your hands. Why do you call to my remembrance, I rejoined, circumstances of which I shudder to reflect, that I have been the miserable origin author? Cursed be the day, abhorred devil, in which you first saw light, cursed, although I curse myself, be the hands that formed you. You have made me wretched beyond expression. You have left me no power to consider whether I am just to you or not. Begone! Relieve me from my sight, from the sight of your detested form. Thus, I relieve thee, my creator, he said, and placed his hated hands before my eyes, which I flung from me with violence. Thus, I take from thee a sight which you abhor. Still, thou canst listen to me and grant me thy compassion. By the virtues that I once possessed, I demand this from you. Hear my tale. It is long, strange, and the temperature of this place is not fitting to your fine sensations. Come to the hut upon the mountain. The sun is yet high in the heavens before it descends to hide itself behind your snowy precipices and illuminate another world. You will have heard my story and can decide. On you it rests, whether I quit forever the neighborhood of man and lead a harmless life, or become the scourge of your fellow creatures, the author of your own speedy ruin. As he said this, he led the way across the ice. I followed. My heart was full, and I did not answer him, but as I proceeded, I weighed the various arguments he had used and determined to at least listen to his tale. I was partly urged by curiosity, and compassion confirmed my resolution. I had hitherto supposed him to be the murderer of my brother, and I eagerly sought a confirmation or denial of this opinion. For the first time also I felt what the duties of a creator towards his creature were, that I ought to render him happy before I complained of his wickedness. These motives urged me to comply with his demand. We crossed the ice, therefore, and descended the opposite rock. The air was cold. The rain again began to descend. We entered the hut, the fiend with an air of exultation, I with a heavy heart and depressed spirits. I consented to listen, and seating myself by the fire which my odious companion had lighted, he thus began his tale. Well, thank you for the follow, Becca Church. And hey, Bree. Welcome, welcome, welcome. That was chapter 10 of Frankenstein. So, he creates the monster. He believes the monster killed his brother and was responsible for the blaming of the death of Justine. And now, he went up to the mountains to relieve himself of his burden because he felt peace up there. And what happens? He runs into his creation. Hang on, it's going to make a little noise. There we go. So he runs into his creation. And lo and behold, his creation is not just a mindless creature. He's learned to speak eloquently. And he has a proposition that if Frankenstein will listen to him tell his tale and how he went from being kind and benevolent to killing. Then monster might give up all killing going forward and spare everyone and just disappear. If Frankenstein won't listen, his rampage will be unmatched. So that's where we've gotten to. I've gotten to eating another piece of peanut butter cookie. Peanut butter cookies are a weakness for me. Yeah. Don't put a box of peanut butter cookies in front of me, because there will not be a box full of peanut butter cookies when I'm done. It will simply be an empty box. So, catching up, Bree. How are you doing? That good. Okay. I've been waiting for this chapter of Frankenstein, because there's very little of Victor's voice, and I'm not all that comfortable with the way I do Victor's voice. It's close to what I'd like, but it's not quite there. But this one, just a deep, slightly menacing voice, even when he speaks kindly. Man, peanut butter cookie. Good stuff. So, as always, folks, reminder, beep. If you want me to read something, drop it in my Discord. It is in the the showcase request channel. You can drop a link to your stuff, and I'll be happy to read it. Kind of surprised. It's been almost 3 weeks since anybody dropped anything. It's actually been 3 weeks. Oh, you know. I know we read Kit's stuff a couple weeks ago, but he put it in chat, I think. So, that's where we're at right now. We got an ad starting in just a little less than 4 minutes, so I'm going to just, chat a little bit before we get up to chapter 11. Chapter 11 is when we actually start to learn about the creature and what has happened to the creature since he left Frankenstein's apartment in Ingolstadt. And this is a huge departure from what you see in the movies. In the movies, monster generally does not speak. Or if he does, it's with the or like, young Frankenstein. He's certainly not eloquent. And here is the next portions of the book. We come to find how the creature survived, where he picked up his language and his eloquence, where he started to develop. And, kind of the theme that the creature brings up is, you created me and yet you hate me. You created me, therefore You owe me to make me happy. You owe it to me. And Frankenstein actually sees the logic in that, and that's why he's followed the creature up to his hut. And I guess it's a thought of, well, what do we owe our creations? 3 children. In a way, it can be parents, because when we're born, we create the parent. But it can also be anything else we've created. What do we owe to that? Do we just throw it out? Or do we try to make it happy? How do you make your writing happy or your art happy? You make yourself happy. So there's a theme in there about that. And, something to think about. Now, we got an ad starting here in about 45 seconds. When we do, I'm going to take a quick break. And then probably grab a couple of cookies. And then I will be back with Chapter 11 of Frankenstein. And we may get through Chapter 12 today, if nobody posts anything. So we will continue in a few minutes. We got about 20 seconds till the ad starts. And we'll see you guys on the flip side of it. Be right back. Well, it hasn't started. Fine. It's being fickle. I'll wait till it actually starts. By the way, if you're a regular here, I am rebuilding the walk-ons. Although they don't happen while I'm reading. They are currently, well, they were muted. I just unmuted them. If anybody comes in while I'm grabbing a cookie, we'll be fine. So, all right, I'm going to go down, grab that cookie, and make sure I've got enough to drink. I'll be back in just a couple minutes. Hang tight. I'm back. You rock. You rock. Wesley! All right. Just about back from the ad. Just about time to read. Welcome back, friends. Let us continue with Frankenstein. Chapter 11. We are in the hut. The creature's hut high up on a mountain. And Frankenstein has joined him in the hut. It is with considerable difficulty to remember the original era of my being. All the events of that period appear confused and indistinct. A strange multiplicity of sensations seized me, and I saw, felt, heard, and smelt at the same time. And it was indeed a long time before I learned to distinguish between the operations of my various senses. By degrees, I remember, a stronger light pressed upon my nerves so that I was obliged to shut my eyes. Darkness then came over me and troubled me. But hardly had I felt this when, opening my eyes, I now suppose, the light poured in upon me again. I walked, and I believe descended. I presently found a great alteration in my sensations. Before, dark and opaque bodies had surrounded me, impervious to my touch or sight. But now I found that I could wander on at liberty, with no obstacles which I could not either surmount or avoid. The light became more and more oppressive to me, and the heat wearying me as I walked, I sought a place where I could receive shade. This was the forest near Ingolstadt, and here I lay by the side of a brook, resting from my fatigue, until I felt tormented by hunger and thirst. This roused me from my nearly dormant state, and I ate some berries, which I found hanging on the trees or lying on the ground. I slaked my thirst at the brook, and then, lying down, was overcome by sleep. It was dark when I awoke, felt cold also, and half frightened, as it were, instinctively, finding myself so desolate. Before I had quitted your apartment on a sensation of cold, I had covered myself with some clothes. These were insufficient to secure me from the dews of night. I was a poor, hopeless, miserable wretch. I knew and could distinguish nothing. But feeling pain invade me on all sides, I sat down and wept. Soon, a gentle light stole over the heavens and gave me a sensation of pleasure. I started up and beheld a radiant form rise from among the trees, moon. I gazed with a kind of wonder. It moved slowly, but it enlightened my path. I again went out in search of berries. I was still cold when under one of the trees I found a huge cloak, with which I covered myself and sat down upon the ground. No distinct ideas occupied my mind. All was confused. I felt light and hunger and thirst and darkness. Innumerable sounds rang in my ears. All sides, various scents saluted me. The only object that I could distinguish was the bright moon, and I fixed my eyes on them with pleasure. Several changes of day and night passed. The orb of night had greatly lessened, and I began to distinguish my sensations from each other. I gradually saw plainly the clear stream that supplied me with drink, and the trees that shaded me with their foliage. I was delighted when I first discovered that a pleasant sound, which often saluted my ears, proceeded from the throats of the little winged animals who had often intercepted the light from my eyes. I began also to observe with greater accuracy the forms that surrounded me and to perceive the boundaries of the radiant roof of light which canopied me. Sometimes I tried to imitate the pleasant songs of the birds, but was unable. Sometimes I wished to express my sensations in my own mode. The uncouth and inarticulate sounds which broke from me frightened me into silence again. The moon had disappeared from the night, and again, with a lessened form, showed itself, while I still remained in the forest. My sensations had by this time become distinct, and my mind received every day additional ideas. My eyes became accustomed to the light and to perceive objects in their right forms. I distinguished the insect from the herb, and by degrees one herb from another. I found that the sparrow uttered none but harsh notes, whilst those of the blackbird and thrush were sweet and enticing. One day when I was oppressed by cold, I found a fire which had been left by some wandering beggars, and was overcome with delight at the warmth I experienced from it. In my joy I thrust my hand into the live embers, but quickly drew it out again with a cry of pain. How strange, I thought, that the same cause should produce such opposite effects. I examined the materials of the fire, and to my joy found it to be composed of wood. I quickly collected some branches, but they were wet and would not burn. I was pained at this, and sat still watching the operation of the fire. The wet wood which I had placed near the heat dried, and itself became inflamed. I reflected on this, and by touching the various branches I discovered the cause, and busied myself in collecting a great quantity of firewood that I may dry it and have a plentiful supply of fire. When night came on and brought sleep with it, I was in the greatest fear lest my fire should be extinguished. I covered it carefully with dry woods and leaves and placed wet branches upon it. Then, spreading my cloak, I lay on the ground and sank into sleep. It was morning when I awoke, and my first care was to visit the fire. I uncovered it, and a gentle breeze quickly fanned it into a flame. I observed this also and contrived a fan of branches, which roused the ember, and they were nearly extinguished. When night came again, I found with pleasure that the fire gave light as well as heat, and that the discovery of this element was useful to me in my food, for I found some of the offals that the travelers had left been roasted, and tasted much more savory than the berries I gathered from the trees. I tried, therefore, to dress my food in the same manner, placing it on the live embers. I found that the berries were spoiled by this operation, and the nuts and roots much improved. Food, however, became scarce, and I often spent the whole day searching in vain for a few acorns to assuage the pings of thunder. When I found this, I resolved to quit the place that I had hitherto inhabited, to seek for one where the few wants I experienced would be more easily satisfied. In this emigration, I exceedingly lamented the loss of the fire which I had obtained through accident and knew not how to reproduce it. I gave several hours to the serious consideration of this difficulty, was obliged to relinquish all attempt to supply it, Wrapping myself up in my cloak, I struck across the wood, towards the setting sun. I passed 3 days in these rambles and at length discovered the open country. A great fall of snow had taken place the night before, and the fields were of one uniform white. The appearance was disconsolate. I found my feet chilled by the cold, damp substance that covered the ground. It was about 7 in the morning, and I longed to obtain food and shelter. At length I perceived a small hut on a rising ground, which had doubtless been built for the convenience of some shepherd. This was a new sight to me, and I examined the structure with great curiosity. Finding the door open, I entered. An old man sat in it near a fire, over which he was preparing his breakfast. He turned on hearing a noise, and perceiving me, shrieked loudly, and quitting the hut, ran across the fields with a speed of which his debilitated form hardly appeared capable. His appearance different from any I had ever before seen. His flight somewhat surprised me. I was enchanted by the appearance of the hut. Here, the snow and rain could not penetrate. The ground was dry, and it presented to me then as exquisite and divine a retreat as pandemonium appeared to the demons of hell after their sufferings in the lake of fire. I greedily devoured the remnants of the shepherd's breakfast, which consisted of bread, cheese, milk, and wine. The latter, however, I did not like. Then, overcome by fatigue, I lay down among some straw and fell asleep. It was noon when I awoke, and allured by the warmth of the sun which shone brightly on the white ground, I determined to recommence my travels. Depositing the remains of the peasant's breakfast in a wallet I found, I proceeded across the fields for several hours until at sunset I arrived at a village. How miraculous did this appear! The huts, the neater cottages, and stately houses engaged my admiration by turns. The vegetables in the gardens, the milk and cheese that I saw placed at the windows of some of the cottages allured my appetite. One of the best of these I entered, but I had hardly placed my foot within the door before the children shrieked, and one of the women fainted. The whole village was roused. Some fled, some attacked me, until grievously bruised by stones and many other kinds of missile weapons, I escaped to the open country and fearfully took refuge in a low hovel, quite bare, making a wretched appearance after the palaces I had beheld in the village. This hovel, however, joined a cottage of a neat and pleasant appearance. After my late dearly bought experience, I dared not enter it. My place of refuge was constructed of wood, but so low that I could with difficulty sit upright in it. No wood, however, was placed on the earth, which formed the floor. It was dry, and although the wind entered it by innumerable chinks, I found it an agreeable asylum from the snow and rain. Here, then, I retreated and lay down happy to found of shelter, however miserable, from the inclemency of the season, and still more from the barbarity of man. As soon as morning dawned, I crept from my kennel, that I might view the adjacent cottage and discover I could remain in the habitation I had found. It was situated at the back of the cottage and surrounded on the sides, which were exposed by a pigsty and a clear pool of water. One part was open, and by that I had crept in. But now I covered every crevice by which I might be perceived with stones and wood, yet in such a manner that I might move them on occasion to pass out. All the light I enjoyed came through the sty, and that was sufficient for me. Having thus arranged my dwelling and carpeted it with clean straw, I retired. I saw a figure of a man at a distance, and I remembered too well my treatment the night before to trust myself in his power. I had first, however, provided for my sustenance for the day by a loaf of coarse bread which I purloined, and a cup with which I could drink more conveniently than from my hand of the pure water which flowed by my retreat. The floor was a little raised so that it was kept perfectly dry, and by its vicinity to the chimney of the cottage, it was tolerably warm. Being thus provided, I resolved to reside in this hovel till something should occur which might alter my determination. It was indeed a paradise compared to the bleak forest, my former residence, the rain-dropping branches and dank earth. I ate my breakfast with pleasure, and was about to remove a plank to procure myself a little water when I heard a step. And looking through a small chink, I beheld a young creature, with a pail on her head, passing before my hovel. The girl was young and of gentle demeanor, unlike what I have since found cottagers and farmhouse servants to be. She was meanly dressed, a coarse blue petticoat and a linen jacket being her only garb. Her fair hair was plaited but not adorned. She looked patient, yet sad. I lost sight of her, and in about a quarter of an hour she returned bearing the pail, which was now partly filled with milk. As she walked along, seemingly incommoded by the burden, the young man met her, whose countenance expressed a deeper despondence. Uttering a few sounds with an air of melancholy, he took the pail from her head and bore it to the cottage himself. He followed, and they disappeared. Presently I saw the young man again, with some tools in his hand, cross the field behind the cottage, and the girl was also busied sometimes in the house and sometimes in the yard. On examining my dwelling, I found that one of the windows of the cottage had formerly occupied a part of it, but the panes had been filled up with wood. In one of these was a small and almost imperceptible chink, through which the eye could just penetrate. Through this crevice a small room was visible, whitewashed and clean, very bare of furniture. In one corner, near a small fire, sat an old man, leaning his head on his hands in a disconsolate attitude. The young girl was occupied in arranging the cottage, but presently she took something out of a drawer which employed her hands, and she sat down beside the old man, who, taking up an instrument, began to play and to produce sounds sweeter than the voice of the thrush or the nightingale. It was a lovely sight, even to me, poor wretch, who had never beheld aught beautiful before. The silver hair and benevolent countenance of the aged cottager won my reverence, while the gentle manners of the girl enticed my love. He played a sweet, mournful air which I perceived drew tears from the eyes of his amiable companion, of which the old man took no notice, until she sobbed audibly. He then pronounced a few sounds, and the fair creature, leaving her work, knelt at his feet. He raised her and smiled with such kindness and affection that I felt sensations of a peculiar and overpowering nature. They were a mixture of pain and pleasure, such as I had never before experienced, either from hunger or cold, warmth or food. I withdrew from the window, unable to bear these emotions. Soon after this, the young man returned, bearing on his shoulders a load of wood. The girl met him at the door, helped to relieve him of his burden, and taking some of the fuel into the cottage, placed it on the fire. Then she and the youth went apart into a nook of the cottage, and he showed her a large loaf and a piece of cheese. She seemed pleased and went into the garden for some roots and plants, which she placed in water, and then upon the fire. She afterwards continued her work, whilst the young man went into the garden, and appeared busily employed in digging and pulling up roots. After he had been employed thus about an hour, the young woman joined him, and they entered the cottage together. The old man had, in the meantime, been pensive. On the appearance of his companions, he assumed a more cheerful air, and they sat down to eat. The meal was quickly dispatched. The young woman was again occupied in arranging the cottage. The old man walked before the cottage in the sun for a few minutes, leaning on the arm of the youth. Nothing could exceed in beauty the contrast between these two excellent creatures. One was old, with silver hairs and a countenance beaming with benevolence and love. The younger was slight and graceful in his figure, and his features were molded with the finest symmetry. Yet his eyes and attitude expressed the utmost sadness and despondency. The old man returned to the cottage, and the youth, with tools different from those he had used in the morning, directed his steps across the fields. Night quickly shut in, but to my extreme wonder, I found that the cottagers had a means of prolonging light by the use of tapers, and was delighted to find that the setting of the sun did not put an end to the pleasure I experienced in watching my human neighbors. In the evening, the young girl and her companion were employed in various occupations which I did not understand, and the old man again took up the instrument which produced the divine sounds that had been enchanting me in the morning. So soon as he had finished, the youth began not to play, but to utter sounds that were monotonous, and neither resembling the harmony of the old man's instrument, nor the songs of the birds. I since found that he read aloud, but at that time I knew nothing of the science of words or letters. The family, having thus been occupied for a short time, extinguished their lights and retired, as I conjecture, to rest. All right, so the creature has found his way. First, he found his way to a village. Well, first, he discovered fire. Good. Another difference with the movies. He likes fire. Figured out that don't touch it, but it can give you warmth. Still doesn't know how to create it, though. He's figured out that you can cook. You can heat pieces of meat, the offals, to change the flavor and the texture and the enjoyment of different foods. He's experienced the reception of humans to him, and that they are none too kind. And now he's found kind of a hiding place in a shed that is attached to a small cottage. He actually can look through chinks in what used to be a window and watch what's going on there. And he's learning about how they live, but also he's feeling emotions. He doesn't know what to call them yet, or what to do with them. He feels them. Peanut butter cookie. I may need to snip that one. All right. 9 minutes to the next ad. Let me look at the length of chapter 12. Not terribly long. And we're almost halfway through the story, which I know is much further along than what you see in the movies. In the book, there is a depth to the creature. He becomes something more than just a creation. Actually, what I'm going to do now, you know what? I'm going to run an ad now so that we can continue uninterrupted, because right now we've got about 40 minutes to the end of the stream. And if I run the ad now, it's probably going to come right at the end of the stream, which is just fine. So I'm going to run a 3-minute ad, so everybody hang tight. I'll be back in a couple minutes, and we'll go from there. And for those of you who are subscribers, we're still here. Yeah, it looks like the ads are going to run now, right? The next ad won't be until just after. Just about when we raid out. Let me open up another window here. Make sure that I am muted. I am. Seeing who's going to be up. Travel novelist. But Tora's up. Weird. But a following. All right. We've got a number of people up, but we'll see who I can... A lot of the people I follow are not up today. Well, we'll see if anybody goes live in the next half hour or so. Oop-a-doop-a-doo. Well, my ad is, where are we at on the ad? 15 seconds. We're good. And welcome back, friends. That little bit of timing worked perfectly because now we have more than 40 minutes to the next ad, which is after the stream ends. So, awesome. So, on with chapter 12. I lay on my straw, but I could not sleep. I thought of the occurrences of the day. What chiefly struck me was the gentle manner of these people, and I longed to join them, but dared not. I remembered too well the treatment I had suffered the night before from the barbarous villagers, and resolved, whatever course of conduct I might hereafter think it right to pursue, for the present, I would remain quietly in my hovel, watching and endeavoring to discover the motives which influenced their actions. The cottagers arose the next morning before the sun. The young woman arranged the cottage and prepared the food, and the youth departed after the first meal. This day was passed in the same routine as that which preceded it. The young man was constantly employed out of doors, and the girl in various laborious occupations within. The old man, whom I soon perceived to be blind, employed his leisure hours on his instrument or in contemplation. Nothing could exceed the love and respect which the young cottagers exhibited toward their venerable companion. They performed towards him every little office of affection and duty with gentleness. He rewarded them by his benevolent smile. They were not entirely happy. The young man and his companion often went apart and appeared to weep. I saw no cause for their unhappiness, but I was deeply affected by it. If such lovely creatures were miserable, it was less strange that I, an imperfect and solitary being, should be wretched. Yet why were these gentle beings unhappy? They possessed a delightful house, or such it was in my eyes, and every luxury. They had a fire to warm them when chill, and delicious viands when hungry. They were dressed in excellent clothes, and still more, they enjoyed one another's company and speech, interchanging each day looks of affection and kindness. What did their tears imply? Did they really express pain? I was at first unable to solve these questions, but perpetual attention and time explained to me many appearances which were at first enigmatic. A considerable period elapsed before I discovered one of the causes of the uneasiness of this amiable family. It was poverty. They suffered that evil in a very distressing degree. Their nourishment consisted entirely of the vegetables of their garden and the milk of one cow, which gave very little during the winter, when its masters could scarcely procure food to support it. They often, I believe, suffered the pangs of hunger very poignantly, especially the two younger cottagers, for several times they placed food before the old man when they reserved none for themselves. This trait of kindness moved me sensibly. I had been accustomed during the night to steal a part of their store for my own consumption, but when I found that in doing this I inflicted pain on the cottagers, I abstained and satisfied myself with berries, nuts, and roots, which I gathered from a nearby wood. I also discovered another means through which I was enabled to assist their labors. I found that the youth spent a great part of each day in collecting wood for the family fire, and during the night I often took his tools, the use of which I quickly discovered, and brought home firing sufficient for the consumption of several days. I remember the first time that I did this, the young woman, when she opened the door in the morning, appeared greatly astonished on seeing a great pile of wood on the outside. She uttered some words in a loud voice. The youth joined her, who also expressed surprise. I observed with pleasure. He did not go to the forest that day, but spent it in repairing the cottage and cultivating the garden. By degrees I made a discovery of still greater moment. I found that these people possessed of communicating their experience and feelings to one another by articulate sounds. I perceived that the words they spoke sometimes produced pleasure or pain, smiles or sadness, in the minds and countenances of the hearers. This was indeed a godlike science, and I ardently desired to become acquainted with it. I was baffled in every attempt I made for this purpose. Their pronunciation was quick, and the words they uttered, not having any apparent connection with visible objects, I was unable to discover any clue by which I could unravel the mystery of their reference. Great application, however, and having remained during the space of several revolutions of the moon in my hovel, I discovered the names that were given to some of the most familiar objects of discourse. I learned and applied the words fire, milk, bread, and wood. I also learned the names of the cottagers themselves. The youth and his companion had each of them several names, but the old man had only one, which was Father. The girl was called Sister, or Agatha, and the youth, Felix, Brother, or Son. I cannot describe the delight I felt when I learned the ideas appropriated to each of these sounds and was able to pronounce them. I distinguished several other words without being able as yet to understand or apply them, such as good, dearest, unhappy. I spent the winter in this manner. The gentle manners and beauty of the cottagers greatly endeared them to me. When they were unhappy, I felt depressed. When they rejoiced, I sympathized in their joys. I saw few human beings besides them, and if any other happened to enter the cottage, their harsh manners and rude gait only enhanced to me the superior accomplishments of my friends. The old man, I could perceive, often endeavored to encourage his children, as sometimes I found that he called to them, cast off their melancholy. He would talk in a cheerful accent, with an expression of goodness that bestowed pleasure even upon me. Agatha listened with respect, her eyes sometimes filled with tears, which she endeavored to wipe away unperceived. I generally found that her countenance and tone were more cheerful after having listened to the exhortations of her father. It was not thus with Felix. He was always the saddest of the group, and even to my unpracticed senses, he appeared to have suffered more deeply than his friends. But if his countenance was more sorrowful, his voice was more cheerful than that of his sister, especially when he addressed the old man. I could mention innumerable instances which, although slight, marked the dispositions of these amiable cottagers. In the midst of poverty and want, Felix carried with pleasure to his sister the first little white flower that peeped out from beneath the snowy ground. Early in the morning, before she had risen, he cleared away the snow that obstructed her path to the milk-house, drew water from the well, and brought the wood from the outhouse, where, to his perpetual astonishment, he found his store always replenished by an invisible hand. In the day, I believe he worked sometimes for a neighboring farmer, because he often went forth and did not return until dinner, yet brought no wood with him. At other times he worked in the garden, but as there was little to do in the frosty season, he read to the old man and Agatha. This reading had puzzled me extremely at first, but by degrees I discovered that he uttered many of the same sounds when he read as when he talked. I conjectured, therefore, that he found on the paper signs for speech which he understood, and I ardently longed to comprehend these also. How was that possible? And I did not even understand the sounds for which they stood as signs. I improved, however, sensibly in this science, but not sufficiently to follow up any conversation, though I applied my whole mind to the endeavor, for I easily perceived that, although I eagerly longed to discover myself to the cottagers, I ought not make the attempt until I first had become a master of their language, which knowledge might enable me to make them overlook the deformity of my figure. For with this, also the contrast perpetually presented to my eyes had made me acquainted. I had admired the perfect forms of my cottagers, their grace, beauty, and delicate complexions. But how was I terrified when I viewed myself in a transparent pool! At first I started back, unable to believe it was indeed I who was reflected in the mirror. And when I became fully convinced that I was in reality the monster that I am, I was filled with the bitterest sensations of despondence and mortification. Alas, I did not yet entirely know the fatal effects of this miserable deformity. As the sun became warmer and the light of day longer, the snow vanished, and I beheld the bare trees and the black earth. From this time Felix was more employed, and the heart-moving indications of impending famine disappeared. Their food, as I afterwards found, was coarse. It was wholesome. They procured a sufficiency of it. Several new kinds of plants sprang up in the garden, which they dressed, and these signs of comfort increased daily as the season advanced. The old man, leaning on his son, walked each day at noon, when it did not rain, as I found it was called when the heavens poured forth its waters. This frequently took place, but a high wind quickly dried the earth, and the season became far more pleasant than it had been. My mode of life in my hovel was uniform. During the morning I attended the motions of the cottagers, and when they were dispersed in various occupations I slept. The remainder of the day was spent in observing my friends. When they retired to rest, if there was any moon or the night was starlight, I went into the woods and collected my own food and fuel for the cottage. When I returned, as often as it was necessary, I cleared the path from the snow and performed those offices that I had seen done by Felix. I afterwards found that these labors, performed by an invisible hand, greatly astonished them. Once or twice I heard them on these occasions utter the words good, spirit, wonderful. But I did not then understand the signification of these terms. My thoughts now became more active, and I longed to discover the motives and feelings of these lovely creatures. I was inquisitive to know why Felix appeared so miserable and Agatha so sad. I thought, this wretch, it might be in my power to restore happiness to these deserving people. When I slept or was absent, the forms of the venerable blind father, the gentle Agatha, and the excellent Felix flitted before me. I looked upon them as superior beings who would be the arbiters of my future destiny. I formed in my imagination 1,000 pictures of presenting myself to them and their reception of me. I imagined that they would be disgusted, until, in my gentle demeanor and conciliating words, I should first win their favor, and afterwards their love. These thoughts exhilarated me and led me to apply with fresh ardor to the acquiring the art of language. My organs were indeed harsh, but supple, and although my voice was very unlike the soft music of their tones, yet I pronounced such words as I understood with tolerable ease. It was as the ass and the lapdog, yet surely the gentle ass, whose intentions were affectionate, although his manners were rude, deserved better treatment than blows and execration. The pleasant showers and genial warmth of spring greatly altered the aspect of the cave, of the earth. Men who before this change seemed to have been hidden in caves dispersed themselves and were employed in various arts of cultivation. The birds sang in more cheerful notes, and leaves began to bud forth on the trees. Happy, happy earth, fit habitation for gods, which so short a time before was bleak, damp, and unwholesome. My spirits were elevated by the enchanting appearance of nature. The past was blotted from my memory, the present was tranquil, and the future gilded by bright rays of hope and dissipations of joy. I now hasten to the more moving part of my story. I shall relate events that impressed me with feelings which, from what I had been, have made me what I am. Spring advanced rapidly, the weather became fine, and the skies cloudless. It surprised me that what before was desert and gloomy should now bloom with the most beautiful flowers and verdure. My senses were gratified and refreshed by 1,000 scents of delight and 1,000 sights of beauty. It was on one of these days, when my cottagers periodically rested from labor. The old man played on his guitar, and the children listened to him. I observed the countenance of Felix was melancholy beyond expression. He sighed frequently, and once his father paused in his music, I conjectured by his manner that he inquired the cause of his son's sorrow. Felix replied in a cheerful accent, and the old man was recommencing his music when someone tapped at the door. It was a lady on horseback, accompanied by a countryman as a guide. The lady was dressed in a dark suit and covered with thick black veil. Agatha asked a question, to which the stranger only replied by pronouncing in a sweet accent, "Name Felix." Her voice was musical, but unlike that of either of my friends. On hearing this word, Felix came up hastily to the lady, who, when she saw him, threw up her veil, and beheld a countenance of angelic beauty and expression. Her hair of a shining raven black, and curiously braided. Her eyes were dark but gentle, although animated. The features of a regular proportion, and her complexion wondrously fair, each cheek tinged with a lovely pink. Felix seemed ravished with delight when he saw her. Every trait of sorrow vanished from his face, and it instantly expressed a degree of ecstatic joy of which I could hardly have believed it capable. His eyes sparkled, as his cheek flushed with pleasure, and at that moment I thought of him as beautiful as the stranger. She appeared affected by different feelings, wiping a few tears from her lovely eyes. She held out her hand to Felix, who kissed it rapturously and called her, as well as I could distinguish, his sweet Arabian. She did not appear to understand him, but smiled. He assisted her to dismount, and dismissing her guide, conducted her into the cottage. Some conversation took place between him and his father, and the young stranger knelt at the old man's feet and would have kissed his hand, but he raised her and embraced her affectionately. I soon perceived that although the stranger uttered articulate sounds and appeared to have a language of her own, she was neither understood by nor herself understood the cottagers. She made many signs which I did not comprehend, but I saw that her presence diffused gladness through the cottage, spelling their sorrow as the sun dissipates the morning mists. Felix seemed peculiarly happy, and with smiles of delight welcomed his Arabian. Agatha, the ever-gentle Agatha, kissed the hands of the lovely stranger, and pointing to her brother, made signs which appeared to me to mean that he had been sorrowful until she came. Some hours passed thus, while they, by their countenances, expressed joy, the cause of which I did not comprehend. Presently I found, by the frequent recurrence of some sound which the stranger repeated after them, that she was endeavoring to learn their language, and the idea instantly occurred to me that I should make use of the same instructions to the same end. The stranger learned about 20 words at the first lesson. Most of them, indeed, were those which I had before understood, but I profited by the others. As night came on, Agatha and Arabian retired early. When they separated, Felix kissed the hand of the stranger and said, "Good night, sweet Safie." He sat up much longer, conversing with his father, and by the frequent repetition of her name, I conjectured that their lovely guest was the subject of their conversation. I ardently desired to understand them, and bent every faculty towards that purpose, but found it utterly impossible. The next morning, Felix went out to his work, and after the usual occupations of Agatha were finished, the Arabian sat at the feet of the old man, and taking his guitar, played some airs so entrancingly beautiful that they at once drew tears of sorrow and delight from my eyes. She sang, and her voice flowed in a rich cadence, swelling or dying away like a nightingale in the woods. When she had finished, she gave the guitar to Agatha, who at first declined it. She played a simple air, and her voice accompanied it in sweet accents, but unlike the wondrous strain of the stranger. The old man appeared enraptured, and said some words which Agatha endeavored to explain to Safie, and by which he appeared to wish to express that she bestowed upon him greatest delight by her music. The days now passed as peaceably as before, with the sole alteration that joy had taken place of sadness in the countenances of my friends. Safie was always gay and happy. She and I improved rapidly in the knowledge of the language, so that in 2 months I began to comprehend most of the words uttered by my protectors. In the meanwhile, also the black ground was covered with herbage, and the green banks interspersed with innumerable flowers. Sweet to the scent and the eyes, stars of pale radiance among the moonlit woods. The sun became warmer, the nights clear and balmy, and my nocturnal rambles were an extreme pleasure to me, although they were considerably shortened by the late setting and early rising of the sun, for I never ventured abroad during daylight, fearful of meeting the same treatment I had formerly endured in the first village which I entered. My days were spent in close attention, that I might more speedily master the language, and I may boast that I improved more rapidly than the Arabian, who understood very little and conversed in broken accents, while I comprehended and could imitate almost every word that was spoken. While I improved in speech, I also learned the science of letters as it was taught to the stranger, and this opened up a wide field for wonder and delight. The book from which Felix instructed Safie was Volney's Ruins of Empires. I should not have understood the purport of this book had not Felix, in reading it, given very minute explanations. He had chosen this work, he said, because the declamatory style was framed in imitation of the Eastern authors. Through this work I obtained a cursory knowledge of history and a view of the several empires at present existing in the world. It gave me an insight into the manners, governments, and religions of the different nations of the earth. I heard of the slothful Asiatics, of the stupendous genius and mental activity of the Grecians, of the wars and wonderful virtue of the early Romans, of their subsequent generating, of the decline of that mighty empire, of chivalry, Christianity, and kings. I heard of the discovery of the American hemisphere, and wept with Safie over the hapless fate of its original inhabitants. These wonderful narrations inspired me with strange feelings. Was man indeed at once so powerful, so virtuous and magnificent, yet so vicious and base? He appeared at one time a mere scion of the evil principle, and at another as all that can be conceived of noble and godlike. To be a great and virtuous man appears the highest honor that can befall a sensitive being. To be base and vicious, as many on record have been, appeared the lowest degradation, a condition more abject than that of the blind mole or harmless worm. For a long time I could not conceive how one man could go forth to murder his fellow, or even why there were laws and governments. When I heard details of vice and bloodshed, my wonder ceased. I turned away with disgust and loathing. Every conversation of the cottagers now opened new wonders to me, while I listened to their instructions that Felix bestowed upon the Arabian. The strange system of human society was explained to me. I heard of the division of poverty, of immense wealth and squalid poverty, of rank, descent, and noble blood. Words induced me to turn towards myself. I learned that the possessions most esteemed by your fellow creatures were high and unsullied descent united with riches. A man might be respected with only one of these advantages, but without either. He was considered, except in very rare instances, as a vagabond or a slave, doomed to waste his powers for the profits of the chosen few. And what was I? My creation and creator, I was absolutely ignorant. But I knew that I possessed no money, no friends, no kind of poverty. I was, besides, endued with a figure hideously deformed and loathsome. I was not even the same nature as man. I was more agile than they, and could subsist upon coarser diet. I bore the extremes of heat and cold to less injury to my frame. My stature far exceeded theirs. When I looked about and heard of none like me, I saw and heard of none like me. When was I, then, a monster, a blot upon the earth from which all men fled, and whom all men disavowed? I cannot describe to you the agony that these reflections inflicted upon me. I tried to dispel them, but sorrow only increased with knowledge. Oh, that I had forever remained in my native wood, not known or felt beyond the sensations of hunger, thirst, and heat. Of what a strange nature is knowledge! It clings to the mind when it has once seized on it like a lichen on the rock. I wished sometimes to shake off all thought and feeling, but I learned that there was but one means to overcome the sensation of pain, and that was death. A state which I feared, yet did not understand. I admired virtue and good feelings, and loved the gentle manners and amiable qualities of my cottagers. I was shut out from intercourse with them, except through means which I obtained by stealth. I was unseen and unknown, and which rather increased than satisfied the desire I had of becoming one of my fellows. The gentle words of Agatha and the animated smiles of the charming Arabian were not for me. The mild exhortations of the old man and the lively conversation of the loved Felix were not for me. Miserable, unhappy wretch. Other lessons were impressed upon me, even more deeply. I heard of the difference of sexes and the birth and growth of children, while the father doted on the smiles of the infant, and the lively sallies of the older child, how all the life and cares of the mother were wrapped up in the precious charge, how the mind of youth expanded and gained knowledge of brother, sister, and all the various relationships which bind one human being to another in mutual bonds. But where were my friends and relations? No father had watched my infant days, no mother had blessed me with smiles and caresses. Or if they had, all my past life was now a blot, a blind vacancy in which I distinguished nothing. From my earliest remembrance, I had been as I then was in height and proportion. I had never yet seen a being resembling me, or who claimed any intercourse with me. What was I? The question again recurred, to be answered only with groans. I will soon explain to what these feelings tended, but allow me now to return to the cottagers, whose story excited me in such various feelings of indignation, delight, and wonder, but which all terminated in additional love and reverence for my protectors. For so I loved, an innocent, half-painful self-deceit, to call them. All right. I think that's about as far as I'm going to go today. We're about 7 minutes away. So, Monster's learning feelings. He's learning to speak. He's learning to read. He's learning the concepts of just being a human. And he's learning that there's more to what's out there than just the villagers who want to destroy him. But he repeated a theme here that Victor had himself pointed out. Oh, that all I had was the need for eat, food, and drink. Victor had previously said something like that. That he wished he could return back to where it was so simple. Where that's all you worried about. And now, the creature expressed the same thought, but coming from a slightly different angle. Victor comes of it because he blames his desire for knowledge and his desire to learn and his hubris on the learning, and that if he had never had the inclination to do that learning, none of this would have happened. He would not be the miserable wretch that he is. Here we have the creature saying, these feelings are sometimes uncomfortable and I don't understand them, and I want people to be happy, but there's stuff that doesn't quite fit. And I think maybe I would have been better if I stayed in my forest and stuck to my heat, my food, and my drink. He's coming from a perspective where if he has learned up to a point that maybe staying simple was the easiest solution. Victor's coming at it from trying to express how he thinks he would have been happier had he not pursued things. They're basically saying the same thing, just from very different perspectives. Because the creature had to learn this stuff. We've seen the passing of about, I think, 3 or 4 moons at this point, so 3 or 4 months. Actually, it's probably a little more than that. Probably about 6 months, because he got there in the snowy season, and now it's the growing season. He's learning these things very, very quickly. And you know what the funny thing is? He's driven to learn more. Recurring theme, right? We have young Mr. Hansen, who set out on his journey to discover the northern passage through the Arctic, because he's wants to learn, and he's driven by it. We have Victor, who wanted to learn how to reanimate life, and he's driven by it. Who is telling this whole tale to Mr. Hansen in hopes that he will learn a lesson. We have the creature, who is driven by his knowledge, his excitement about getting knowledge, and about learning about the cottagers, that he's being driven forward. And so really what you're hearing from Victor and the creature is kind of a callback to Hansen saying, don't follow in my footsteps. Give it up. Let things be. All right, gang. Thank you so much for hanging out. Thank you, everybody who popped in. Bree and Kit and Becca and Stretch and Siobhan. Hope you guys all have a great weekend. I will be back Monday with another gaming stream. I'll decide over the weekend what I'm going to do there. Again, if you have stuff you would like me to read, please drop it into my Discord with the into the Showcase Request channel. I would love to read your stuff. Otherwise, I think we are going to raid. Let me look. Let me look who's up. You know, it looks like a Torah's live, so we're gonna raid a Torah. All right, so we're gonna raid a Torah. So remember that the raid calls are either way. It's aloha. If you are a subscriber, you can use the ones below because those are subscriber emotes. If not, you can use the first one. And once we go in, just remember, aloha. And that way we can get in there. Have a wonderful weekend. Enjoy your time. Enjoy whatever you're going to do this weekend, and I will be back to see you on Monday, 2 p.m. Pacific. Have a great one, you guys. We'll see you then.
One day she'll run no more, and the black rabbit of Inlay can never be ignored. But Sable does not fear this, for she knows